All right. Hello. Yeah, I have less hair and stuff now. A few minutes later. Basically, so to finish the video, the it seems to be that the gods who like on one level the gods are all the immortals, uh, which immortals are planets, stars, and land masses are treated as immortal. But there's another meaning of God, which means somebody who has knowledge of those immortals. So anybody who's read the Book of Two Ways is a god, a human god. And so the spell for being a god, saying only only the dead see Osiris, um, I think is a way to say like the protagonist, the person whose coffin it is, um, they're coming from Egypt. And if I'm correct that Osiris is Afro Eurasia, they're coming from Osiris. They're going to Amentet, which is America, the West, Amentet Neferet, the beautiful West. And and so when they encounter people or when they encounter the gods, they're like the locality gods, like um, Baja California or Newfoundland or whatever, which are deified, um, then they basically identify themselves with celestial deities, and particularly with Ra, with the sun god, and with um, Thoth and the Eye of Horus and Mot. Like I don't know if the protagonist is identified as those things. I think they're more identified as Osiris because they're from Osiris. Um, but as far as celestial deities, they're mostly identified with the sun, with Ra, with Re. And so so this is part of like, they say like, they warn the underworld gods um not to uh hamper their the passage of the protagonist, um because the protagonist either is a celestial god, like perhaps Ray, Ra, and I'm gonna call the sun god Re because I think that's a more accurate pronunciation, even though Ra is the more well known in the West pronunciation. Um, so anyway, the protagonist is basically telling these deities like, if you do anything to me, anything you do to me, like I think that one of the spells may be addressed to either uh, Newfoundland or the Chesapeake, says anybody who, like, anything you do to me, you do to the sun. So basically, if you harm me, you're harming the sun, and if you kill me, you killed the sun. There won't be a sun anymore. So that's like again, I don't think any of this is the belief system. Well, I know for a fact, like none of the priests thought the sun was a dude or thought the sun would die, or no, no, this is a tradition, and symbolism is only for the intelligent. It's like, I mean, what do they say? Like symbolism, symbolic thought is like the sign of higher intelligence. So it's no surprise that modern people can't grasp it, but the ancients could, because I think modern people are just largely TV drones and whatever. They don't know how to think um, for themselves. They just know how to regurgitate. Anyway, whatever the case may be, like, um, I think the protagonist is saying like, I came from the Akit, the Eastern Akit, which is the Eastern Horizon. I came across the Atlantic Ocean. Nobody comes across that ocean except the sun and the moon and the stars. No humans do, and certainly no living humans do. So like, so that's a way to um, solidify one's identity as a god, is to say, to either tell the American people um, or just to chant or to say that basically only the um, only the dead see Osiris. Only dead people have ever seen Afro-Eurasia. Because it seems to me that these gods, the human gods, the ones who know, who have the knowledge of the immortal gods, um, that this is probably what they told people everywhere. You know, they told people, like they themselves went back and forth to be across the ocean, but the regular people were like were deterred from venturing out because they were told that it's impossible. You know, like it says in the Epic of Gilgamesh, I think, like the land, it calls Kur, which is the underworld, America, it calls it the land from which no man returns. You know, it talks about how it's virtually impossible to even reach the place. Um, and I think there is probably similar traditions in the Americas about their underworld, which is Afro-Eurasia, which they called, the Aztecs called Mictlan, and Tlalocan, and Mayans called Xibalba, I guess. Um, so so they'd say that in America, you know, this text is written alongside South America. So it's saying that um, that you know, it kind of seems like it's something that you say to the people there. You tell them, you know, I came from the land that no mortal has ever seen, and no living mortal has ever seen. So that proves that I'm a god. You know, that proves that I'm the same as Ra, that I'm the same as, you know, these celestial bodies, because the celestial bodies are, in this tradition, they're the only ones that travel across because, you know, every day they go west. You know, the sun goes west and goes around the world. So that's the fundamental, you know, perhaps that's kind of the fundamental attribute of a god, is going to the underworld and being able to go to the underworld and return. You know, that's like, that's central to the stories about a lot of gods, like, you know, Inanna, um, like, I mean, certainly in the Egyptian religion, you know, Ra and Thoth and all of these. So it's just, that's the general like belief system, quote unquote, or tradition worldwide, is that nobody crosses the ocean except the gods, which are the celestial bodies, and um, and the dead, you know. So they believed, you know, you're basically telling the people in South America, oh no, everybody back there where I came from is dead. There's just dead people and gods. So it would be a lie. Like if that's what it is a lie. I mean, it's hard to know like how far this went and how much. I mean, I think there was a lot more people who did understand the symbolism of paganism in ancient times and were not, and they understood the actual truth. But there may have been some amount of actual misleading of people, um, and you know, and that might help explain why there's not more widespread evidence of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, um, there's a lot of evidence. It's clear there was a massive amount of pre-Columbian contact. There's clear evidence of ancient Chinese, ancient Mesopotamian, ancient Egyptian, ancient um, Hindu influence in America. But, you know, there's still like a lot of things that people point to because, like, the like academia still sees this as pseudoscience, as, or supposedly they call it pseudoscience and fringe and everything. And the mainstreamers say like, well, if there was any contact, then there would have been, much more evidence. There would have been, you would see, much more transfer of agricultural goods. I mean, there is evidence of the sweet potato going across like the ocean, but basically you don't see wheat in America. You don't see, um, I mean, there's not a very like the sweet potato is the best kind of smoking gun in a way, but even that is kind of convoluted and it mostly just crossed the Pacific. And it mostly just stayed within the Pacific, like from America. The sweet potato went from South America to like New Zealand or something. And so it mostly just spread within that area. But between like actual like mainland Afro-Eurasia and America, there's just such a dearth of, like a lack of any of those kind of obvious things that you would look for as a sign of pre-Columbian contact. But I think that's partly for this reason that contact was kept very restricted, you know. And it may be that that Christopher Columbus knew about this. There's people who say that he knew full well where he was going, that he had lots of ancient maps from Egypt and different places, and that he, knew really where he was going. But so that could be, that could explain the how to be a god, the spell to be a god. Um, and yeah, I'm thinking that at Panama where it says this is where the Hanamat bread or maybe the bread of Mot goes out every day to Osiris. At least on one level, I think that's referring to Venus because I think, yeah, that Mot is a Mot is the goddess that appears when Isis and Nephthys merge. So Isis of the East and Nephthys of the West. And so I suspect that Isis is Lucifer, the morning star, uh, Venus rising, and Nephthys is Noctifer, the evening star, Hesperus, and Hesperus and Phosphorus, basically in the Greek tradition. Um, so, and Mot, it's interesting the fact that Mot is, um, like, Mot is referenced many times in the context of offerings. And I think the Hanumet bread is connected to that, or maybe the same as that. Um, but yeah, like the reason that I'm thinking that there's at least a, a strong possibility that um, the map indicates cocaine as well in Panama and Colombia, and tobacco in the Chesapeake is because, there's like 15 or so underworld gods, which are all places. Um, so the Chesapeake is a god, the Great Lakes are a god, um, and, etc. Cuba's a god, Baja California. So they, all the gods have, none of them have hats, like crowns. And crowns are very important in ancient Egypt. Like crowns mean everything. Crowns carry a lot of meaning, like in which particular crown. Um, so there are only two deities that do have crowns. There are some deities that have horns. A lot of them have horns, but none of them have crowns except for the sharp one, which is the Chesapeake, and uh, and then the Great Lakes god. And the Great Lakes god has an Aten, like a solar disk on his head, and his head, it's on the top of his head, and the top of his head is like his head is Lake Superior, his tail is Lake Michigan. Um, his front legs are St. Lawrence River. His back legs seem to be the Hudson River, and so, but it's the northwestern side of his head that has the Aten crown on it, and it's the northwestern side of Lake Superior, which has the copper mines, like ancient copper mines from 9,000 years ago. Um, some of the oldest copper mining in the world, on the planet. Um, so so I'm you know I think there's a great chance that that is not a coincidence. Like I say, like the ancient Egyptians didn't just throw crowns here, here and there, willy nilly. Like crowns are very specific. There's like the crown of Upper Egypt has a very specific meaning. The crown of Lower Egypt has a very specific meaning, etc., etc. So the fact that only these two gods have crowns, I could pretty much guarantee is not without significance, especially since these crowns are themselves highly significant symbols. One being the Aten, which is arguably at least one of the most important symbols in ancient Egyptian religion. It's basically a sun disk, solar disk of Re, and then the Chesapeake has a feather. Uh, I mean, it's not exactly a crown, I guess, but he has a feather coming off the top of his head, a large feather, which presumably is the feather of Mot, which is, that's like the iconic feather in ancient Egyptian religion. The feather of Mot. This is what is weighed in the underworld against your heart, against the heart of the deceased or the protagonist, at least in some like books of the dead. And if the heart is heavier, I think, than the feather, then it means you are too guilty of sin and you get eaten by Amit, the monster, or something like that. So that could be just a thing, like the whole like through camel through the eye of the needle in Christianity, where they say, "Oh yeah, like the rich can totally get into heaven, but they just have to go put a camel through the eye of a needle." Or I've heard somewhere it's actually supposed to be put a rope through the eye of a needle. Anyway, but either way, it's something that's impossible to do. So it's saying it's just like this is the kind of clever wording that ancient religion and mythology is built out of. Like saying, like explaining things in mythological ways. So yeah, they say, oh yeah, sure, you can rich people can totally go to heaven. Here's the needle, you just got to get this huge rope through it. Another way to say, a polite way to say they're never, or I don't know if it's polite or it's just a funny way to say they're not getting in. Like there's no way. um, and by the same token, this may mean that, because they say if your heart is heavier than the feather of Mot, then then you get eaten by the Amit, or your heart gets eaten or something like that. Um, and if it's lighter than the feather, then you go on to be a god or something like that. So I mean, there's the chance again that it's the same type of thing that is basically saying you're dead, you're not becoming a god, you're not going to any heaven, But you could if your heart was, like lighter than a feather. Is the same. Like, yeah, if you can put a rope through a needle, then sure, yeah, you're totally gonna become a celestial body and, you know, be be circulating around the heavens for eternity. But if your heart is like an actual heart, then it's gonna be heavier than a feather, and you did. I don't know. That's like, I mean, I have no idea what if any afterlife there is, but I think like also the fact that the other god who has, a symbol atop his head seems to relate to an export, like a natural resources being copper, um, that strongly suggests that the other one would have the same meaning as well. And so then the question is, what would be the export that would be symbolized by the feather, just the way the sun disk symbolizes copper because it's a bright, shiny, you know, and it seems like in the text, it actually, it refers to copper. It says the protagonist is the one who brings the copper, but it uses it in a language that kind of, it's like a double entendre between referring to the copper and referring to the brightness of like the sun. It's like, it's a, seems to be perhaps like a play on words where they're referencing both in the same breath, kind of. So the sun is associated with these shiny metals like copper. And so what would the feather of Mot be associated with? It says in the Book of Two Ways that it tells Ra Ray that I think he's the creator of Mot, but he also inhales Mot. It says inhale the Mot. So if it's something that's inhaled, that may be tobacco simply based on the location of the Chesapeake is a major, um, has seemed to long been, a major tobacco place. And then similarly, it refers to the Hunamut bread, which seems to be Mott as well. Um, and it might even say Mott on like the other side of Panama because it has text along both sides of the continent uh, and let's see, Panama, the sky is opened. um okay, no, it doesn't specifically say that. Like on the other side of Panama, it says the sky is open and the earth is open, the eastern Orchid is open and the western Orchid is open, the northern chapel is open and the southern chapel is open. The doors are open and the eastern gates are open for Re that he may emerge from the Orchid. The two doors of the night bark are opened for him and the gates of the day bark are open for him, that he may breathe Shu, that he may create Tefnut, that whenever the ones who are in the suite follow him, they follow this protagonist like Ray every day. Okay, so it doesn't mention Mott there. It does mention breathing Shu, which I think Shu is just air. Um, but yeah, so the fact, like, if you put together the fact that the solar, that the Great Lakes crown seems to represent copper, then that itself makes it, you know, very possible that the Chesapeake is crown represents tobacco. And then if that establishes that Mott is associated with exports that you inhale, then it could be that the Mott, if the Hennemet bread, which I think is the Mott bread in Panama, um, was some different type of thing you inhale or some different export that's maybe similar to tobacco. That could be cocaine, and of course there's the the study that
seem to find cocaine and tobacco in the pharaoh's mummies. So so yeah, that's how you become a god. I guess this is my working theory right now for the spell to become a god is that you basically that the gods meant like what the gods were in terms of human gods is the humans were like going to the underworld was fundamental to just as it was fundamental to being an immortal god like a celestial deity. That was one of their main um, attributes was that they were always going down to the underworld and going around the planet. um, that I think that's also for the same reason basically was the hallmark of what made a human god into a human god was basically having the same power as the sun to travel around the planet. Um, and and apparently part of that was to potentially well yeah whether it was believed whether it was meant literally or not at least superficially to lie to the common people the regular people and tell them oh no, I'm just a god. Like there's no living people where I came from in Afro Eurasia and Osiris. Um, they just it's just dead people there. And then you go back to Osiris, and then you have to tell them the same thing about Amentet Neferet, America. You say, oh yeah, like I came there from there because I'm a god. I just went there, came back, but like it's just dead people there. There's no like living people there. So that's what you have to tell to like common people. Just like nowadays, like people don't know that there's living people in hell, because that's the same. Like hell is the Germanic name for America for Amentet Neferet. And, in the ancient times, like they knew there was, like in some traditions, they do reference living people, but a lot of times it was kind of acting like it was just a place full of dead people. Um, So yeah, I'm not sure. I think there was definitely a spectrum of how or there might have been a spectrum of how much people knew the truth or not. I certainly think a lot of people did know the truth. Plutarch certainly knew the truth, and he wrote about it very openly. So I mean, I'm not saying it was so well hidden, but certainly at least as a tradition, this idea that the land across the water is not a place you can actually go. And if you do go there, you're gonna die. And only dead people can go there, and or gods. So yeah, this makes perfect sense. So yeah, if you've ever traveled across an ocean, either across the Pacific or Atlantic, then in this sense you're a god, even if you didn't know this spell. I would think. I mean, it's basically all part of the same concept. Um, so anyway, I think I'm about to cut out. I think it's about to cut me off here, but yeah. So now you know how to be gods. I mean, it's kind of cool. I guess I'm technically a god in that sense. Um, but I mean, we should all be gods in that sense. We should all have access to this information and be able to travel at will, and you know. Um, so anyway, I guess I'll just end it here and thank you, my godly friends. Have a good day.